One of America's top spy tools has expired at the exact moment that we have major negotiations with a top terrorist state. That's one of our big stories of the day. Hi, everybody. I'm Jenna. Welcome to Scoop and Smarter News, where we're about quick, concise, nonpartisan news. But on Mondays, we like to take a deep breath, give you the lay of the land for the week ahead. And this is a very interesting confluence of events that one could not plan. It just sort of happens that we have, again, a tool of spycraft, not without controversy, expiring at an exact moment that we have major news of negotiations with Iran and a major meeting involving world powers this week with President Trump present overseas. So we're going to get into this, these two events happening at the same time. Do they mean anything together? Not necessarily. They're not necessarily related per se, but it makes us think about technology and the use of technology and how it is helping us or hurting us, either empowering Americans or breaking the law, which is the accusation here for this particular type of spycraft. Again, not without controversy, but really interesting. And I'm excited to dig into that with you because we need a little more time for that. In the meantime, technology just overall is such a big topic of conversation, isn't it, these days? We have so much we're dealing with regarding, artificial intelligence, for example. What's going on with SpaceX, the largest IPO in American history. SpaceX isn't just about rockets. It's not just about cars. It's not just about an X feed. It's also about data centers and the advancement of technology. And this thinking, well, could we actually take these data centers that have been controversial here in the United States and elsewhere as well about noise and water and land and put them up in outer space? And that's how we're going to advance technology in the future. It's a thought that makes you just think a little bit more, isn't it? Like, what are we to think about that? That wouldn't have come to mind, but that's part of the future for SpaceX, or a vision for SpaceX, which now is already a leading technology company that's becoming larger and richer by the moment as it's continuing its public trading, only into this second day here. And we know that stocks can go a lot of different directions, but an interesting story to continue to watch. So hold that in your mind. This is the advancement of technology that's taking place. And then we get this sort of announcement on a Monday morning from overseas. Take a listen.
Today, I can announce that the government will ban access to social media for all children under the age of 16. Now, I come to it as a parent myself. I know exactly the fears that we all feel when we're thinking about this issue. All I've ever wanted for my own children, hand on heart, is for them to be happy and for them to be safe. And I think that's what any parent wants. But I ask the question now, do we truly believe that social media creates a happy environment for our children? Do we truly believe that it's a place where they can feel safe? I don't think I even need to answer those questions, do I?
What do you think about that? That is the UK Prime Minister, Keir Starmer, announcing this morning a new law is going to go into effect next year in the UK that's going to ban those under the age of 16 from using social media. So that would include, for example, if you're watching Smarter News on YouTube, or maybe you watch us on social media like Instagram, if you are a 15-year-old, you're not going to have access to our news site. So that's sort of interesting. I don't know how much of our audience is 15-year-olds, but the goal here, as the Prime Minister says, and we've seen over the last year or so where this debate has really risen to top of mind, not just for parents, but really for all of society, is what about this technology? Is it enabling us? Is it empowering us? Or is it hurting us? Or is it doing it a little bit of all of these things at exactly the same time? And how do we protect the most innocent in society? If adults are going to wade into this area and being pioneers and also experiment a little bit, well, what about the 12-year-old? What do we do for the 12-year-old? So this is following in step where we're seeing other countries make similar moves. Here in the United States, we have not seen that as of yet, but obviously we're a very different structured country. And we have seen over the last year, as we reported to you here at Smarter News, that there have been different cases at the state level where social media companies have been rebuffed because it has been decided that they have violated state law. So where federal law may not come in strongly for particular reasons, protecting minors, that could be the one argument. The states are taking their turn, and we see dozens of these cases percolating on the horizon. So this is definitely an area to watch. And I'm curious your thoughts on this. Does technology make us happier and safer? we want that for our children, but certainly we want that for ourselves as well, don't we? And it's a question that we're also asking when it comes to a much larger story that we're continuing to follow, and that is what's happening between Iran and the United States. As we reported to you here at Smarter News, we were listening to Secretary Rubio testify before Congress, and he described how negotiations were ongoing with Iran. And despite what we know is available technology to all of us, as we're text messaging each other and emailing and calling, and it feels like in any moment you can reach somebody, that wasn't the case with this pace of negotiations, that a lot of the negotiations were taking days, sometimes up to 5 days to get an answer. And that was a difficult challenge in trying to go back and forth to figure out a path forward that could be a ceasefire or perhaps a more longstanding deal. And so I want to be very careful with this. We enter into the week with the White House and Iran talking about a deal that's in place. And you may see headlines that can refer to it as a peace deal or a ceasefire. Quite frankly, we don't really know how to describe this because we haven't seen the text. And in fact, in our note this morning, we're constantly reviewing, how we're writing up stories for you. If you're an insider, you get that delivered to your inbox. It's a great cheat sheet for the week ahead. If you'd like to become an insider, please do join the party. You get to watch this broadcast live. We love that. And we love to interact with you. But as we were writing this and writing a little bit about this framework, we refer to it as a peace deal. And I thought, wait, we can't do it. We can't refer to it as peace. We actually don't even know what it is at this point. So the number one takeaway going into this week is there's an announcement of a deal, but we don't know what it is. And quite frankly, we have to be a little bit slow to try to describe it without the actual text. The vice president, J.D. Vance, was on morning television here in the United States. He was speaking to CBS, and here's what he had to say.
Plan to release the full text this week. We want the American people to see it. But we've also seen, of course, some misreporting about what's actually in the agreement. We've seen some accurate reporting about what's in the agreement. I think the most important thing for the American people to appreciate is that what this agreement does is really twofold. On the one hand, it ensures that Iran will never have a nuclear weapon while simultaneously opening the Strait of Hormuz. You already see oil prices from a high of $126 a barrel down to about $80 a barrel today. That's a lot of progress. But it also, Gail, fundamentally extends a hand to Iran and says, look, if you guys are willing to honor your obligations, if you're willing to allow real inspections of your nuclear program, then we will welcome you back into the world economy. I think what the president of the United States wants to do is turn over a leaf of 47 years of a failed relationship between the United States and Iran, but that requires the Iranians to actually honor it their end of the bargain. So when people say that billions of dollars of assets will be released, that's not true. What is true is that Iran will have a much better and much more prosperous future if they meet the obligations they make in this agreement. We'll, of course, see. That's one of the things we're going to work out in the technical talks that will follow the official signing on Friday.
Okay, so perhaps we see the text of the deal. We don't know exactly any more specifics, even though J.D. Vance talked about some of the technicalities that could happen and we could address on Friday. But it gives us even more reason to proceed a little bit cautiously. Just so you have a variety of different perspectives, I have the top Democrat in Congress. He is the minority leader in the House of Representatives, Hakeem Jeffries of New York. And here's what he had to say when this news of this deal was breaking, and we were getting an idea of it really early on Sunday. He was being interviewed on Meet the Press, and here's what he had to say.
To take a look at what the ultimate resolution is, if there is one, Donald Trump has now said 38 or 39 different times during the course of this war that it was about to come to an end and an agreement was about to be reached, and that has never happened. In fact, Donald Trump told us that Iran's nuclear program had been completely and totally decimated. He said that last year. It was not true. Donald Trump told us that the Iranian regime was on the brink of collapse in the aftermath of the Ayatollah being killed. That, of course, has not happened. And so at this point in time, all we can conclude is that this reckless and costly war of choice has been a disaster as it relates to strengthening the national security of the American people. Things aren't better for us, they're worse. In fact, Iran is stronger right now. What we have seen is gas prices skyrocket through the roof, and that has had an adverse impact on hardworking American taxpayers.
So let's talk a little bit about this now that you have two different perspectives on that. Hakeem Jeffries represents the Democratic Party side well, and critics of the Trump administration saying that this war has actually made the United States less safe and has put our economy and our people at risk unduly. The president has responded to those critics and in general said this is actually making America more safe. He feels he's confronting an enemy that needed to be confronted. And he's the first one to take that risk. And that in order to get to a place where there can be a rebuilding of a relationship, President Trump believes in his stated arguments on behalf of this conflict that there had to be a show of force. And so that was the risk that he was willing to take. History will judge whether or not we're safer, less safe, or where this goes from here. At this very point, we have very little details about any sort of a deal. The idea, the loose idea, is that we're going to have the Strait of Hormuz, which is that very important waterway, reopened. We go back to more of a status quo of before this conflict, of being able to have commercial tankers move through that important waterway very easily. And that really what Friday would be, it seems, this is the impression hearing from the administration and reading a variety of interviews, including one that the president just did with the New York Times over the last 24 hours, is that this is really an agreement for more negotiations about the nuclear program, which is really at the heart of this. So what Hakeem Jeffries was talking about there is that we have hit over the last year, targeted these nuclear strikes. There's been questions about how successful those strikes have been. Part of the reason for that is that we don't have great on-the-ground intelligence that we know of. It's hard for us to get in there. We're not certainly in there with our own soldiers. That's why there's questions about boots on the ground. Or would we ever send our own military in to inspect, to understand what's actually happened here? So this is where there's a question of like, what is the status of the Iran nuclear program and what actually would be the definition of winning here for the United States? So just briefly on this, in order to understand where we're coming from and where we could potentially be going, you have likely heard of a deal, an Iran nuclear deal that was put together by the Obama administration. And those that are former officials of that administration continue to say that this was the right deal at the right time that made the world a safer place. However, there were fierce critics of that deal as well. What the deal did is it negotiated a certain standard or acceptable level of uranium, of nuclear material that Iran would be able to keep. So while there were different provisions, different requirements, Iran had to stop doing the one thing, it had to allow inspectors in, it had to move certain material to a different country. There were definitely things that Iran had to follow through on. And if they did, there would be different ways that the deal would become a little bit more laxed of supervision of Iran over the years. And a way to think about this is what the Obama administration deal did in many ways was try to severely constrain the nuclear program in Iran so Iran would never have a nuclear weapon, but not completely eliminated. And that probably comes from a difference of philosophy. Remember, this is, going back 10 years. We have the wars in Afghanistan and Iraq, fresh out of the war of Iraq. We still have Afghanistan as an active war. There's been critiques of past administrations of going into countries and telling countries what we're going to do and regime change and all of this. The Obama administration has a different philosophy. They want to give Iran some ability to chart their own course forward. So they're not requiring a complete elimination of anything to do with nuclear technology, but they are allowing a deal that would allow very, very little, they say, so little that it would be really, really hard for Iran to build a nuclear weapon. But critics say, but can you ever really know? Can you really trust the inspections? Yeah, allowed a little bit of daylight there. And therefore, this is still a state sponsor of terrorism. Can we trust him? This was the critique of this deal. So some thought it was a really big win in the limitations it put in place, and others thought it wasn't good enough. And that's one of the reasons why the Trump administration walked away from the deal and said, we're not going to be part of it because it allows too much in our estimate. You have heard from the Trump administration over the last several months that Iran cannot have a nuclear weapon. The key question in this to watch moving forward is a couple things. One, do we even get everybody together on Friday where you have American and Iranian representatives together? Even if they were in the same room, that would be something that we haven't seen. Usually they're not even together So if that even happens, that's important. If there's an agreement that's somehow signed that opens up the Strait of Hormuz and we see free navigation again, big deal. But then moving ahead, when it comes to any sort of nuclear negotiation, what we're really watching is, are there acceptable levels that the Trump administration will set? Would they be similar to the Obama administration? What would that actually look like? Are they willing to say, all right, Iran, if you want to have a nuclear power plant someday, like that's okay. But you never can ever develop a nuclear weapon. Like, what are the specifics? And it really doesn't, you don't have to get overwhelmed with, when I say specifics, the details of it. If there's any allowance that the Trump administration gives to Iran to develop any part of any nuclear program, whether it's, where they say it's safe, it's just for energy, that would be notable. And the comparisons to what was previously in place would go way up. So that's what we're going to watch for. But let's just wait until we get till Friday. I mean, look at what happened last week. There were talks of potentially a deal happening. And then according to the United States, Iran shoots down one of our helicopters. We have 2 pilots missing in the Persian Gulf and are hours in the water before being recovered by an American drone, a drone boat. We've never seen that sort of rescue before. So things can turn south really quickly. So pardon my suspicion here. I want to be as optimistic as the next person. I would love to maybe talk about something else. But right now, this is important. And why is it important? We can never state this enough. We can go back to 1984 when America designated Iran a state sponsor of terrorism. Iran is behind major terrorist groups operating all over the world, including Hamas, Hezbollah, the Houthis. There's even ties to Al-Qaeda that have been investigated, documented, and are concerning. So that is the reason why we continue to prioritize Iran when it comes to national security. It's not just about the country, it's about these proxies. And we know these proxies don't just stay where they are in the Middle East, they can also travel. Which leads us to our next point. What about this spy tool that has suddenly expired? What is this all about? So let's talk a little bit about this because this is so interesting. And it is intentional that we would have this conversation over and over again. Because when this spy tool was approved, it was controversial. And there were little provisions put in place so that every few years, Congress would have to take another look at it. But in order to understand this, we have to go back to the 1970s. And there was something passed called the Foreign Intelligence Surveillance Act. You're going to hear it as FISA, the Foreign Intelligence Surveillance Act of 1978. And this is really born out of a time where there was increased electronic surveillance. Technology was changing. So now we're doing all sorts of surveillance, but people are worried about the government doing too much surveillance. So they're going to pass this legislation to try to give some oversight to the government surveillance. But now there's questions about whether that oversight has led to overreach by the government overall. So in an effort to check the government's power, Congress actually created a whole new question about whether or not the government's doing too much or is empowered to do too much. So what FISA did is it created a path to, instead of this kind of blanket surveillance, that in order to do some surveillance that the US government believes it needs to do, it's not just going to happen in total secrecy, but pretty close to total secrecy. There's going to be a court created. It is going to be the Foreign Intelligence Surveillance Court. I'd love to tell you about this court. I'd love to tell you what it looks like, what it sounds like, what the procedure's like. No journalist has ever seen it. It's highly classified, it's top secret. This is where the government goes in and says, hey, we really want to do surveillance of a certain area. There's parameters set up. In fact, we don't really know what parameters could even mean. We think it could mean a geographical location, but could it be something else, like profile of a person in a certain geographical location? We don't know how specific it gets. We have no idea. It's top secret. So there's some oversight with law, but there's very little oversight in the actual courts. And so let's say I'm the government and I say, okay, I really would like to do surveillance in North Africa. And I'm very concerned. Here's the reasons why. And the court said, okay, great. You can do surveillance in North Africa and you can do it for a year. Warrants in America are typically more narrow than that. You can't just say, I want to watch somebody's house for like 6 months just in case. You have to be more specific. So these are rather general. And so in the aftermath of 9/11, so the FISA courts are established. This is ongoing. But then we have a major terrorist attack in the United States. Technology changes again. And now around 2008, there's another sort of, I guess I would call it provision. I don't know if that's exactly the right term, but it's FISA Section 702. Section 702 is what has expired. FISA is ongoing. It's been ongoing for decades. So this sort of surveillance, sort of top secret checks and balances is continuing to happen. But the Section 702 has expired. And what this would allow me to do as the US government is it would allow the government to conduct warrantless electronic surveillance of non-US citizens abroad. So anyone abroad, I'm curious about surveilling this area in North Africa, and maybe I'm able to do it for a year time. That's what Section 702 allows me to do in this new technology era, where I can work with technology companies and gather information. The problem with this, according to its critics, for the government, they say this is a very powerful tool. We have to do this sort of surveillance. We have to create this dragnet so that we catch the bad guys. Like, we can't be so super specific. We got to be bigger in order to make sure we protect America. The problem is let's say there's someone in North Africa that gives me a call. We're chatting on the phone. They're being surveilled, but now I'm being surveilled. And wait a minute, I'm a US citizen. You need a warrant to do that. That's a legal search and seizure. That's what the critics would say, which is you can't just do that and whoops, you get an American citizen that's part of this surveillance. There needs to be a warrant. There's a procedure for that that's very important to the foundational documents in America, that the government can't just surveil or search me without a warrant. We've likely seen just domestic stories that raise that question about, wait, can a police officer check that backpack? Can a police officer actually come into your home without a warrant? I guess if you let them in, but still, there's limits to this. So this is where there's debate. And over the years, especially now, again, given technology and technology's reach and accusations from both members of the Democratic Party and the Republican Party of a weaponized government, now there's further concern. Wait a minute, could the government, through Section 702, saying that they're going to surveil non-US persons abroad, catch US citizens, and maybe the US citizens are actually more of the target, and now the government's surveilling these US citizens without warrants? And do those US citizens, I'm taking this further than it needs to go, have a certain political belief? Wait a minute, there needs to be another check and balance on this. There needs to be a requirement that if a US citizen is pulled into as part of the surveillance, that there's some sort of warrant. That's what lawmakers want. Enough lawmakers that this Section 702 expired. Now, here's another reason why, and we're going to get to both sides of this in a second, why a practical reason why Section 702 matters. According to available information, this is a Congressional Intelligence Committee report, about 60% of the president's daily intelligence briefings comes from information collected under Section 702. That's a lot. 60% of his daily briefings have to do with this sort of data collection that now may or may not be usable, but there's a catch. According to the way that the court, remember going back to the FISA courts are set up, Section 702, according to some that are looking at it, even though it technically expired according to the legislation that's before Congress, it still can be used until next year. There's an argument that it could still continue. So that's probably taking the pressure off a little bit from this becoming a top news story, but I'm making it a top news story for us because I think it's really interesting. So there's some arguments that it could still happen. So the president's going overseas, for example, to a meeting of the G7, which is, these are industrialized democracies. We say that we share the same values. We like to come together for these meetings. This has happened for several decades, that his briefings would still be thorough. That suddenly there wouldn't be like this big hole in the briefings, that this probably still could be used. But there's enough lawmakers that are making noise about this, including Republicans, that we wonder what this legislation could look like. And so here's Senator Mike Lee's legal background. And here's what he had to say, because what happened in Congress is basically that the House failed to move legislation, I believe. The Senate then was going to be taking it up. And then the Senate wasn't able to pass anything short term because they were just trying to do this little Band-Aid, and get it, like, just keep it moving for a couple weeks. So the question is, could there now be a new proposal by the Senate? The House is out back in their home districts right now, but the Senate is in session. Could we see the Senate try to move something that would be more substantial, but with a caveat? So here's Senator Mike Lee. I'm reading from a statement on X, despite apocalyptic warnings from a deep state that wants unfettered domestic spying, FISA won't cease protecting America even for years after it expires. So he's saying FISA is going to exist, surveillance is going to happen, it's going to be fine. Section 702, here's what we got to do. We have time to agree on a warrant requirement to defend the privacy of American citizens and get FISA reauthorized. So that's what Senator Mike Lee wants done. He's saying, listen, we can keep it, but just put in like a little line in there and say that you need to make sure you have a warrant if there's an American involved. Especially, I mean, think about that for a second. You know, let's say there is somebody that's being surveilled by the US government overseas and they have repeated calls with an American citizen. Maybe the American citizen isn't part of anything. Maybe they're just a family member. And those calls are important because I'm just making this up, giving us an idea of the location of the person. We're learning a little bit more about what they're doing, what their lifestyle is like. It's going to help us with on the ground spying. What's the big deal about saying, yeah, we need a warrant for the American citizen? And by the way, we don't even really know if what that warrant would look like, because it would probably be in the top secret FISA courts. So why not? Why not just put it in there just in case? The president has a different take on this. I'm going to paraphrase here. He says he's accusing the Democrats of using FISA against him, that he was caught up in this sort of surveillance. And what he wants is that, he said, I'm against FISA if it doesn't come with the Save America Act. So he wants it wedded to this legislation that up until now has been all but kind of put on the back burner because it can't get any movement in Congress. This is a legislation that would require proof of U.S. citizenship to vote. And it's tricky because according to the U.S. Constitution, states have to set up their parameters for voting. That's something that states are empowered to do. The federal government can't order states to do certain things. So it's not just as, black and white as U.S. citizenship. There's a lot of nuance to that, which is making it a little bit more complicated in Congress. So the president says, this is important. He wants to Save America Act. All voters must show photo ID. All voters must show proof of citizenship. No mail-in ballots except for illness, disability, military travel. No men and women's sports. No transgender mutilization surgery for our children. Thank you for attention to this matter. So he wants this all put together. But it's just worth noting that the SAVE Act and Section 702, not necessarily related in any way, and also controversial, even from members of the Republican Party. So it's not just like this, it's not just Democrats slowing things down. In this case, Republicans that still have majority in the House and the Senate. We don't know how much longer that's going to last because of the midterm elections. And you have a president that's not totally pushing Section 702. So everyone's allowed to kind of take a moment here. And according to one write-up by NBC News, Senate Democrats have blocked a more robust addendum to Section 702. So Republicans that want to add that warrant, Democrats apparently are hedging on that. And again, Republicans don't have a big enough majority in the Senate to move anything by themselves. So this is just something to be aware of. One, to be aware of surveillance is happening in general. We kind of maybe talk about that, generally speaking, that people are watching us all the time, that our phones are tracking us. And by the way, that's one of the arguments against having to put a warrant or government surveillance in general, because we have willing surveillance of ourselves just through our own cell phones that are with us all the time. So it's just something to think about. So this is where we're seeing the edge of technology advancement and questions of what's within the bounds of not just what's healthy and safe, which is what Prime Minister Starmer was asking earlier about children, but also what's American, what's according to the Constitution. Does Section 702 last? Should that just be, we have dragnets of surveillance activity all over the world. And if you're an American caught up in it, hopefully you're not doing anything illegal. You got nothing to worry about. No big deal. Or is this worth taking a stand on and saying, the courts are going to be secret anyways, and we don't really know how this is going to go. Just throw in a provision there to get a warrant. If an American is involved, if suddenly you realize there's an American involved, like, let's just make sure to get why is that a big deal? So this is what's happening on Capitol Hill. At the same time, we have these major international news stories continuing. The Iran-US war. We also have what's going on between Israel and Hezbollah and Lebanon, a question about how Israel fits into all of this, because really this has become an American-Iranian negotiation. The president continues to, now he's not disavowing Israel, but in his latest interview, he did admit that it can be challenging to work with Prime Minister Netanyahu. That's a very important U.S. ally. So we're going to watch that space too. We also have some developments. I don't want to forget just mentioning this too. the war between Russia and Ukraine and Russia's invasion of Ukraine continues to be really, really hot. We continue to see these large scale attacks. So I don't want to forget that as well. And the importance of surveillance activity overall when it comes to briefing not only the White House, but also our top intelligence officials who are making decisions on the next big story that we may not know about is a topic worth spending a little time on. So thank you for allowing me to do that today. Again, despite the lapse, the program is apparently recertified until March of 2027, and that the current FISA authorizations that were in place as we were in place last week will continue to be in place this week. That's what some legal analysts say. But there are some questions about whether or not the information providers, so let's say the government's working with AT&T, or let's say the government's working with Google, whether or not their lawyers are going to say, oh yeah, we'll continue to work with the government in this capacity, or we're not quite sure how this is going to work. So big story yet to come. If you see more about it this week, just know this is a little background for you on it. And I think it brings up a really interesting question about technology at this point of time. Again, does it make us healthier, safer, more effective? Does it make it happier? So what do you think? How does this fit into it? So that's just something I thought would make us a little bit smarter as we go into the week. We'll continue to watch these developments. You know, here we are on a Monday. What are things going to look like on Friday? Anyone's best guess. But this is where we start the week. And so you have a firm foundation. So if you see these stories develop, you know what is a significant development and maybe what perhaps is not going to be. Beware of the noise and the different reports on reports. We really want things on the record, and we really want to see what are officials saying on the record as far as details. We want to see the text. We want to understand what's this preliminary framework of an agreement between the U.S. and Iran, and how does that move us into a different position for perhaps a larger agreement when it comes to the nuclear program. All right, guys, thank you so much for your support of Quick, Concise, Nonpartisan, Smarter News, where we do no surveillance. We just ask you questions, and we look forward to your answers. And we appreciate your support as we continue to navigate these historic times together. I hope you have a great week wherever you are, and we'll see you back with more on smarternews.com. Bye.